فلا تبحث عنها حديث حسن. It was narrated on the authority of Abi Thalaba al-Hushni, Jarthum bin Nashir radiallahu anhu, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Verily Allah the Almighty has prescribed the obligatory deeds, so do not neglect them. He has certain limits, set certain limits, so do not go beyond those limits. He has forbidden certain things, so do not indulge in them. And He has said nothing about certain things, so as an act of mercy, so do not out of forgetfulness, so do not inquire about or go into these things." So one thing I want to mention about this hadith that's different from all the other hadith we've done so far is that a group of scholars say that this hadith is a weak hadith. So there's two main things that for a hadith to be authentic out of other things. One of them is the chain of narrators, all right, and the matan, the words themselves. And this is called isnad, the chain of a hadith. And this is one of the khasa'is, all right, or one of the things you only find in Islam, all right, that to the point where, for example, let's say this person narrated this hadith from this person going back all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the 6 books of hadith, they talk about the history of the narrators. Right? They'll say this person 90% of the time, right, he's accurate, or this person, so and so, and also the character of the person. So this is a science you only find in Islam, and this shows the authenticity of our deen. So this particular hadith, sometimes you can overlook the chain, but not the words. So the other thing they say, this is hadith mawquf. And what does hadith mawquf mean? That this statement did not go back all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is actually a statement of Ibn Thalaba, the companion that's mentioned in this particular hadith. That being said, the words and the meaning of the hadith is correct. All right, so there is lesson and there's principles actually that scholars have taken from this hadith that are accurate. One thing about the name Thalab al-Hushni, Jurthum bin Nashir, there's actually many different opinions about his name and the name of his father. But I will mention the word Jarthum nowadays in Arabic doesn't mean something, like people use it. But the actual name of Jarthum at that time means Aslu Shay, the origin of something. All right. And there's a lot of words that today are used in slang that have a different meaning, all right, good or bad, but actually, in the actual meaning itself, is different than the way it's used, and we see this in many different words. Now, another thing about this particular hadith, it talks about basically 4 main points. All right, whatever Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has made obligatory, don't lose it. All right, don't or don't waste it. Whatever Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has set limits for, don't go beyond those limits. Whatever He has prohibited, all right, so do not indulge on those things. And there's certain things that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, all right, that He has not forgotten, but He, out of mercy for us, has not mentioned anything about. So do not inquire about it, and we'll discuss these inshallah points, and we'll leave the floor open for questions and comments. This again, a couple of things about this companion. All right, he was known to be around the Prophet ﷺ. He was known to give allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, the allegiance at Ridwan. All right, and so he's known, all right, to have been around the Prophet ﷺ, also for a couple of the battles. Now, one thing we talk about here is the fard, all right, which is the obligatory. And some say that the word fard and wajib are the same. All right, many of the scholars say fard and wajib, they're the same. It means that it is wajib. Some say no, fard is that things that are fard that are found or obligatory in the Quran. And whereas wajib is things that are made fard or obligatory from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad or the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, in the opinion of Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, all right, primarily these words, fard and wajib, are the same, obligatory. In the Hanafi madhab, it is divided. All right, it is divided. So, for example, in the Hanafi madhab, praying 5 times a day is obligatory. For witr, all right, they say it's wajib. All right, so saying it's not qat'iyatu dalala, like it's not 100% definite, but for them it is borderline like obligatory. So they don't use the same word for fard, for obligatory, or they have different levels of obligatory. And same thing for sunnah. There are certain sunnahs that are highly recommended. All right, there's the nawafil, extra, these that we do, and then you have also within the halal, these different subcategories. So the idea is here, the one thing we do focus on, all right, there are things that are 100% obligatory for us to do, so don't waste it. And one of those things, that primary things, is the salah, for of course. So don't waste your salah by not performing it, or if you perform it, don't waste it by not focusing. Allah says one of the characteristics of the believers, الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, they make it intentional to focus in their salah. So then, also, don't be amongst the people to wait to the last minute, like 5 minutes before Maghrib, to pray Maghrib, or right when the sun is about to rise to make Salah. Be amongst that try to pray the Salah as soon as you can. If you're not able to pray in Jama'ah, in the masjid, in congregation, but try to make sure that you make the Salah time. So these are examples of deeds. So whether Salah, fasting, Hajj, and these different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made obligatory. So we should make sure we should try our best, to fulfill them and not lose them. And the reason Salah is emphasized here, at least in this Halaqa, is because this is something that we have to do on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And also, you take Salah out of your life, what makes you different than those who don't believe? As the Hadith mentioned, if you take Salah out of lives of many, what makes us different? Everyone else goes to work, everyone else goes to school, everyone else studies, and does the daily things. But Salah, makes us, and that actually doing Salah distinguishes us to a certain extent. Of course, there's many other actions that can distinguish us, but primarily, Salah is there as as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna salata tanha al-fahsha wal munkar. Salah helps prevent, corruption and misdeeds. And also Salah, puts our life in perspective. It reminds you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It disciplines us, and we should center our life around it. So here, we should make it a point to always hold on to the obligation and not neglect them. All right, and this should be something that is made intentional at a young age. All right. The other thing is, the one thing I want to mention here is that we see here that from this hadith that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the legislator. All right, that no one else has the right to make any laws. We can't just make up our own stuff. We can't make up, Fajr is 3 rak'ahs. All right, somebody will say, my iman is so high today that I'm going to add more. I'm going to fast an extra hour. Right, whereas the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is to break your fast as soon as the sun sets. So the thing is, all right, we should not make up things for the sake of making up things, or if we don't know an answer to something. That's why Allah says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. All right, so we're always told to ask and seek knowledge. So here, one of those things is that, all right, we should make it a point that and understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the legislator. That is very important, especially in our times where we have so many different systems. And a lot of times we say, oh, Islam is like democracy, or Islam is like Christianity, or we try to Islamicize the things that are wrong. So, for example, this particular holiday, we're going to make it an Islamic holiday, whether it be Halloween or whatever. Whereas the reality of the matter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a deen. His deen is complete. There's no need to add or subtract from it. So if there's any insufficiencies from ourselves, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us and to guide us, but at the same time also, we should always remind ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only legislator. So that's why when we say La ilaha illallah, there's no one worthy of worship except Allah. There's no one who is a legislator except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That no one makes laws except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to our deen. So then when you think about that for a moment, all right, you work in any corporation or even in schools, the school can say no chewing gum, right? No drinking particular things. No, at a certain job, they may have a certain dress code, all right? Doctors or firefighters or whatever. And we follow those rules, right? Whatever it is that pertains to that job. And there's no problem with that as long as it doesn't contradict our deen. But when it comes to our daily life, our transactions, our businesses, how we take a loan, how you buy a house, and all these different things, it is very, very important, all right, to see what Islam says and do it through the lens of Islam. And one thing I just want to take a moment here, every action we do in Islam, the scholars divided it into one of five categories. So if you don't remember anything from today's Halaqa, remember these five things, all right? Well, the first thing is, all right, our main sources, of course, in Islam for legislation are the Quran and the Sunnah. And number 3 is the consensus of the Sahaba, or the companions. Number 4 is Qiyas, which is divine analogy. So, for example, you're not going to find the ayah in the Quran that says marijuana is haram, but the hadith says anything that intoxicates the mind is forbidden. All right, so anything that falls under that category is forbidden. So marijuana falls under that. So thus marijuana is forbidden, of course. So that being said, of course, there's others, but these are the four main legislative sources we use as Muslims. So, for example, another example, Salah. We see that Salah is commanded in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in the Quran, does it tell us how to pray? Yes or no? It doesn't. So then we go to where? The Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right. Say Umar Hamada, wants to find out if he's smoking hashish or weed is halal. All right. You were gonna ask for smoking weed? I guess I read your mind. But anyways, no. So cigarettes and weed are different. But for the weed part, we'll talk about weed right now. All right. So is there any ayah in the Quran that directly speaks about weed? No. In the Sunnah, you won't find any hadith about weed. All right. Nor have the companions spoken about it. So then the fourth step is qiyas, divine analogy. You will find the Prophet ﷺ has forbidden, or he says that anything that intoxicates the mind is forbidden. So then, all right, that you would see that weed falls under that category. By the way, speaking of, I remember we did a halaqa this a long time ago, like probably 10 years ago, where a lot of people actually were debating whether, they were trying to say weed is halal, it makes the iman higher, it relieves their stress, right? But don't smoke it, okay? I'm gonna catch you smoking weed outside, all right? All right. But anyways, yeah. So make it clear that weed is haram, all right? Generally speaking. Anyways, so then these are the four main legislative sources, but the five main categories of actions, or actions fall on these five categories, generally speaking. And in the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa is divided into more categories, but generally speaking, these are the main five. Number one is fard, which means that you get rewarded for doing it, but you'll get punished for not doing it. So something that's obligatory, like salah, you get rewarded for doing it, but you'll get punished for not doing it. Listening to your parents, all right, same thing, and so forth. Number two is haram. You get rewarded for not doing it, but you'll get punished for doing it. So drinking alcohol, disobeying parents, cursing, backbiting, lying, stealing, and so forth. Number three, all right, is makruh. Something that if you get rewarded for not doing it, but you won't get punished necessarily for doing it. Of course, in the Hanafi opinion, there's some things that are makruh that is forbidden, all right, and highly disliked. But generally speaking, for the most other opinions, the makruh is something that if you get rewarded for not doing it, but you won't get punished for doing it. I'll give you two examples of something that is makruh. Number one, eating something like garlic or something before salah, all right, primarily in Ramadan. All right, what everyone eats, like, this guy ate biryani, this guy ate maklube, this guy was smoking hashish probably, all right? Inshallah not. But anyways, the smell or fragrance, so that shows that this is dislike. Number two, all right, is when the imam has started salah, running towards the salah, all right? And those footsteps can be a source of distraction for those praying. So whatever is meant for you to catch. Now, for example, we talked about this before. It's better to park farther away and walk extra steps to the masjid. Every step towards the masjid is a good deed, replaces a bad deed. But if it's time for iqama, don't park far away now and say no. Now park closer, if you can, of course, and don't block anyone or whatever, and try to make it to the jama'ah. All right. So here the idea is but when inside the masjid we shouldn't run. All right. And this is another thing that is you better not to. So number one, we said as far as obligatory, rewarded for doing it, punished for not doing it. Number two is haram. We get rewarded for not doing it. We get punished for doing it. Number three is makruh. We get rewarded for not doing it, and we won't get punished necessarily for doing it. Number four, all right, is sunnah. We get rewarded for doing it, and necessarily won't get punished for not doing it. All right. And number five is mubah. So, for example, drinking tea or chai is mubah. No reward or necessary punishment. So if somebody drinks chai or coffee, you don't get more reward for drinking coffee than chai or tea. If you ate chicken instead of this, so these are mubah, all right? Now the thing is, we shouldn't live our life based upon halal and haram and ignore the middle part, and do all the makruh, say it's not haram, or do the opposite. I don't do the sunnah, say it's only sunnah, all right? The actual thing, for example, if you work in an 8 to 5 job and you barely have a half-hour break and you pray the fard, and you really not usually pray sunnah, but you're not able to at this moment, is one thing. But if you have a whole day off and the weekend off and you're at the masjid, pray the sunnah if you have time. All right? And so the Sahaba would try their best not to miss any sunnah. So our job is to try to do as many sunnahs as possible. And they say one of the biggest differences between the 2 rak'ahs of duha, which is after the sun rises, and the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr is what? The 2 rak'ahs before Fajr is sunnah, all right? that you do with the salah that is fard, which is Fajr salah, and this helps make up for our shortcomings in the obligatory prayers. So we're praying Salat al-Maghrib. Somebody probably thinking about what's for dinner. All right, somebody thinking about many different things. All right, so the Sunnah prayer helps up make up for that. And the Duha prayer, is a separate prayer that Prophet ﷺ rarely missed, that we should try our best to do also, after the sun rises, 20 minutes or before, like 20 minutes before, at least 20 minutes before Salat al-Dhuhr. But the thing is, we shouldn't live on the edge of halal and haram. And we realize Islam is not a halal and haram religion, because you would only find 150 ayahs in the Quran that talks about halal and haram. Primarily, it sets the principles for us to live our life, and the scholars, deduce the rulings for us and simplify it for us. And we realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only legislator. So again, from the Halaqa tonight, if you remember, this is very important, that all of our actions fall under one of these 5 things. All right, something that is fard, obligatory, haram, which is forbidden, makruh, which is something we get rewarded for doing, not doing it, punished. We won't get punished for doing it. The sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all right, and his actions saying and approval, and mubah, where there's no reward or punishment. And we did discuss this previously before, but a lot of things that are mubah can become a reward. So for example, sleeping is mubah. Okay, sleeping is mubah, no reward or punishment. But can sleeping become a reward? Yes. If I make the intention before I sleep that this sleep is for waking up for Fajr, or I want to get energy to wake up for Fajr, I want to get energy, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want to get energy to pray tahajjud. So now every second of your sleep becomes a worship, it becomes an ibadah. All right? 2 people take a shower. One person got a reward for the shower, the other person didn't. The other person made the intention of ghusl. All right? That I'm making this, and to follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he made the intent of ghusl, he gets the reward, and now does not have to make wudu, right? Because the ghusl counts as a wudu also. But the one who just took a shower without any intent is mubah. All right? So the idea is, everything we do, we should always think to ourselves, what action is this, what category of this action does this fall under? Going to school and studying, all right? It's a mubah thing. But now if I study with the intention, I'm studying because I want to earn a halal income. I want to be able to take care of my family. I want to be able to use this money to help the ummah. I don't want to only use it on myself. But if you're going to study, I want to get a Tesla, I want to get rich, I want to get famous, right? I want to just do everything on myself as an individual, then there's no reward in that. But if the idea is, I'm studying to have an income, so be intentional in what you do. All right? And that's why when somebody says, make dua that I win the lottery, can you make dua for someone to win the lottery? All right, unless it's a halal lottery, but generally speaking, all right, you can't. So then that falls under some haram. So you can't make, or somebody says, make dua that this my girlfriend likes me back. All right, you can't make dua for that either. All right. So the thing is, the things you make dua for have to be permissible, and they have to fall in this category. So then this is a way to scope your thing. So the clothes I wear, or the actions that I do, they must fall under one of these 5 categories. So we should try to indulge as many things that are sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and our actions, thoughts, and ideas, and also, all right, that are within the bounds of Islam. And the most beloved actions to Allah are the obligatory ones. All right, and that's why we said everyone should have a maximum and a minimum. So ask yourself, what is your maximum? All right, if your maximum is I pray 5 times a day, and let's say I pray 10 sunnahs, and then sometimes I pray at night. So then you have 3 stages within yourself. So say one day you have low day, you only prayed the 5 prayers. All right, but what if your maximum is the 5 prayers? All right, and then you have a minimum. So the idea, we should always try to up our maximums. All right, with reading Quran, with fasting Mondays and Thursdays, with giving, charity, and sadaqah, we should always try to up, all right, our minimums, our maximums, and our minimums. All right, so somebody's minimum can be somebody's maximum. So I'll give an example. One time somebody came to Fajr, and he made the last part of the rak'ah, like the salam of the Fajr. He felt like he was the best Muslim in the world. He was so happy. And the guy same person came to Fajr, missed the Allahu Akbar in Salah, Takbirat al-Ihram, and he felt like he was the worst Muslim. All right. Now this person came earlier than this person, but feels worse. Why? Because this person never misses the Allahu Akbar. Now, just to understand something, the Allahu Akbar in a fard prayer is more rewarding. Praying with the Imam is more reward than the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr. All right. So if you think about that for a moment, saying Allahu Akbar in the same time with the Imam is more reward than the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr. And what's the reward for the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr? is better than this whole world and what it contains. So then we think twice, like, I want to make it to where when the Imam starts, I start with the Imam. There's such a high reward in that. All right. So then we realize, we're always competing and trying to get more. You always think about it. All right. If this was in dollar amount, we would never miss it. All right. Imagine the richest person on earth does not equal the 2 rak'ahs of before Fajr. There's no comparison. But the thing is, on the day of judgment, or even at death, if somebody was to come back to life, they will realize how valuable those 2 rak'ahs are. But must we wait till death for us to realize the value of what we have? But what an opportunity now to take advantage of these moments, all right, and do these things as much as possible. Because, brothers and sisters, we can talk about everything that's happening in the world, but when our Fajr Salah is like Jum'ah prayer, this is a great accomplishment, all right? That, you know what, the Ummah is thirsty. We're coming, and now we realize that these masajid, all of them in Tampa, as many as we have, are very small, because the number of Muslims are so many. And when we make it a point to come and gather and start our day in the remembrance of Allah, the rest of the day, Allah protects us. So the thing is here, we see that, all right, praying with the Imam, Allahu Akbar. So this person who misses it feels really bad, as if his day is messed up, all right? So the thing is, every one of us has different standards. Every one of us has every one of us, even like sitting in the halaqa now, all right? Some are coming with like 10 intentions. I want to learn, I want to take notes, I want to implement what's being said. For others, like, I can't wait till it's Isha and the halaqa is done, all right? For others, it may be in between, I want to pray in jama'ah. So based on your intention, it helps with the reward. So I'm praying jama'ah, getting 27 times the reward, and all these different things. So our mind, we always have to have positive thoughts, always improving, right? We should never be stagnant, right? Somebody who got a PhD in the 80s and never did anything after, pretty much you're not going to be very effective now, right? Like, Brother Fakir does the IT courses, things are always changing, right? You can't always stay stagnant. So I think in Islam, we're always, that's the beautiful thing about Salah, it keeps you moving, all right? It keeps you healthy. And they even said in Forbes magazine, all right, that the most productive people reach the peak is around 12 or 1 o'clock. But if you pray Fajr Salah, you start 2 hours before everyone else starts. Your productivity. In addition to that, especially overseas where people walk to the masjid, all right, it helps them with their health and other things. So anyways, all right, these are the 5 main categories of actions, and we should always consider them, all right? And before we do any action, we should always think about what category does this fall under, and we should never undermine the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Something with I want to mention that we do every day, also brushing our teeth, all right? We should make the intent. This is following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Coming nice, dressed to Jum'ah, also sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are things that we should remind ourselves that are easy to do, and there's a reward for it. Imam Malik used to say, I have seen many of our scholars answer a question by saying, I dislike this or I don't like that, and I don't answer by saying halal or haram. All right. So a lot of times people jump the gun. People are like the haram police. Everything's haram. Like, they can't sleep at night unless they say haram. All right. Like, they have to say something is haram, or like they just don't feel good. Their life is empty without it. All right. Some people try to push things to become haram. All right. And that's why we'll see in the last part of Hadith that there's extra questioning that we should go into. Right. Now, one thing, somebody asked a scholar about music, and there's different discussions about music. Of course, we're not going to get into that right now. So this guy, he said he doesn't like it. So then this guy kept on insisting. So one of the things he said, on the day of judgment, when the deeds are presented, all right, which side do you think the music will be on? All right, on the righteous or the not, the good or bad? He said the bad. He said you answered your own question. All right, but here it shows this scholar was very, very afraid or very particular about saying something is haram. Why do I mention this? All right, when you say something is haram, that means every time you're indulging or that person is indulging, all right, in that particular thing, they are getting sin. And you're speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is divine authority. So you have to be very, very careful. If the scholars of the past, like Imam Malik and others, were very careful, we should be extra careful. All right. And now, generally speaking, I'm not talking about things that are known to be haram. So, for example, everyone here can agree that alcohol is haram. Right? There's a consensus. The scholars in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But where comes the tricky part? When a doctor prescribes it. All right. Or, for example, somebody called a cookie company about Oreos. They're like, Oreos are haram, right? Now people send like all the ingredients of something, okay? So the idea is, All right, Allah, the rule in Islam is that everything is halal unless what? Proven haram. Except for what? Like certain things like meats. Meats are haram until proven halal. That's the opposite rule. But for everything else, everything is halal until proven halal. كل شيء حلال إلا ما حرمه الله. When it comes to actions though, actions require evidence. All right. الأصل بالأفعال التقيد بحكم الشرعي. The rule in Islam is that actions that you do must have an evidence. So if you're studying something, you have to have evidence. Is this right or wrong? If you're taking a loan, you must know, is this right or wrong? So again, going back to this point, that we shouldn't be very careful. And the reason I mentioned this, all right, a lot of the mashayikh and imams, when I sit with them, like the amount of times they hear people saying things are haram, all right, it's so much like they can become millionaires from that. All right, for every time they heard somebody say something haram. One example: a sister goes to the masjid and she prays a certain way. The haram police are there. They say you're praying wrong. All right. She goes to the imam. The imam says no, it's right. That's because you didn't see this particular method of salah, and it's within the confines of Islam. Don't go and jump the gun. You have to go and study yourself and see. Wait, this is actually okay. All right, the placement of the hand, whether it's here or there. All right, whether it's by Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and so forth, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmed. All right, we're supposed, or directly from the source. So then we shouldn't jump the gun and say this is haram if you don't know about it or if you haven't seen it before. So one time somebody came to the masjid, and this person hasn't been in the masjid for many years. So he comes to the masjid for the first time in a long time. The first thing somebody does is show him a Riyadh Salihin Hadith book. He's like, read this Hadith. All right. He's like, anyone's pants below the ankles is in the hellfire. So this guy's like, man, if I come to the masjid, I'm going to hellfire. If I don't come, I'm going to hellfire. All right. He's like, I'm going to hellfire anyway. But then when you read and you study, there's 15 different narrations to this Hadith. And when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this, Abu Bakr, asked him about his garment. And the Prophet ﷺ then said, if it's done out of what? Arrogance. That if you do this out of arrogance. And back then, if you look at the kings, even movies, right, in Europe, and the kings, and they would wear those red robes, it was a sign of pride and arrogance, right? Now, the opposite happens now. People a lot of times people raise it, all right, and it gives them pride. Look at me, all right? Look at you, Ahl Bid'ah, all this stuff, right? So you have to be very careful, all right, when it comes to fiqh. And this is one thing that many people don't get into, is the study of the extraction of Islamic law. Inshallah, we plan to do a course of how Islamic law is derived. Because then you realize there's a wide majority or a wide range, and the fuqaha spent many years in their lives dedicated to extracting laws. So then generally alcohol we'll say is haram, but then in certain cases it may become permissible, right, upon necessity. And here the necessity, the darura, is something that you can't define on our own, because everybody thinks a phone is necessary. All right, every 10-year-old is like, yeah, phone, I think I have to have, without it I can't live. All right, no, it's not necessary. All right, but for example, car insurance. Generally in Islam, we don't have insurance. But in America, driving a car, many scholars have said, is a necessity. All right, unless you live like in New York and some other places where there's a bus transportation. All right, Tampa, I mean, you'll get fired if you wait for bus transportation. But anyways, all right. So the idea is, some scholars say, as far as going, that you should never get full coverage. You should only get minimum coverage insurance. That's an opinion. But with life insurance, many say you shouldn't get life insurance. All right. So then they say driving, for the most part, for a lot of people, is a necessity, even when they talk about loans. All right. So for example, somebody who can't afford to go to college, he tried every means, everything, and he went to the scholar and he said, all right, and he realized that this is the only thing he can actually, or she can do in her profession. All right. Let's say being a dentist, and you know what? Then the scholar gives him the fatwa in that particular case. It's not a general ruling. All right. So then you would see that even with that, you're very hesitant, because you're given, and that's why they say when you make ijtihad, the scholar makes or derives or gives a ruling. If he's right, he gets 2 rewards. If he's wrong, he gets 1. All right. But not everyone is required to search the evidence unless you become a student of knowledge, and that's what we acquire to be, inshallah, or we should want to be students of knowledge. So then we understand, all right, the evidences for certain things. The other thing is, the statement of Imam Malik shows that the scholars of the past used to have so much fear of speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that although matters were clearly haram, they used to avoid saying it's haram, but they would say, I dislike it. All right? Yeah, I dislike it. All right? So never be put in a position, if you're not sure about something, to say this is haram or halal, especially if you're not sure about it. Because you can cause somebody to do something that is haram, all right, because you're passionate, or you can say something that's halal and it's not, all right, and mislead a person. and you don't want to take that responsibility on the day of judgment. Now, of course, the Sahaba themselves did not ask much if something is disliked or recommended, as to what they used to do, what Allah loves, whether obligatory or recommended. So the Sahaba are always having this concept, and we talked about this before, of wara. And wara is like taqwa. Taqwa is beyond halal and haram. You want to do something that's going to get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, for example, there's nothing about sleeping at night or staying up that, you know what, somebody's able to stay up at night and pray Fajr is necessarily not wrong with that. But then you have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, realizing, all right, that I want to take it an extra step. I want to try to pray tahajjud. All right. So I'm sitting in this halaqa, like thinking, like, what can I do to make that happen? All right. You know, and this is very particular. When we fill our taxes, when we see how much our income is, a lot of people are not honest. People take unemployment checks and they're not deserving of it, all right, or they're not in need of it. Even when there's food pantries, all right. If you're alhamdulillah driving and you're able to afford, you're not in need of any of it. Don't take it as a luxury, because there are people that their lives depend on it, all right. And poverty here is different than poverty in many other parts of the world. So the thing is, don't think for a moment, all right, I'm just getting an extra break or I'm doing this out of luxury. Actually, the whole concept of wara is that we be honest in all cases, all right, and try to be honest if possible. And this is something that, you know, a lot of times we may get laxed in, all right, because we think we're gaining some worldly benefit. And I remember this is one thing, you know, especially dealing with a lot of imams. And one person came to visit Tampa, and he was the imam. He was giving a speech. So the brother said to him, "I can give you a car rental, the family discount." All right. Now, if you ever work in an enterprise or any company, my brother used to work one, everybody becomes your family. All right. You never know you had so many family members. Like, hey, I'm like your brother, I'm your cousin. All right. Can you give me a family discount for the rental? So this person, they offered him the discount. He said, no, I won't take it. He's like, I'm not ready to answer this on the day of judgment. So imagine, you know, he could have got a big discount, all right, by saying he's a family member of this person and get the car rental for a lower price, but he refused to. All right. And this is called what? That, you know what, it may seem like a benefit, but he's holding his standards, and here higher than the concept of halal and haram. He wants to be as close as possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he wasn't even want to take a chance, all right, to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or do something that might be shady. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is having a feast at somebody's house, and this person was a convert to Islam. And this person tells him that this food he's eating, he bought it from when he used the money that he used to make before he was a Muslim to buy this food. Abu Bakr, when he heard this, right away he started to spit out the food from his mouth. Why? Because this person before Islam was what? A fortune teller. All right, a fortune teller. Now, the other extreme we shouldn't do also. Aisha asked Prophet ﷺ about some who came to Islam, and she doesn't know if they said Bismillah or not. Prophet ﷺ said they're Muslim, don't ask. All right, don't ask. So then don't go to somebody's house and be like the haram police. Where'd you get this food from? Where'd you get that from? They invite you to your house. All right, they're Muslims. The rule of thumb, they shouldn't ask. All right, so don't overdo it, and that sometimes can be actually more detrimental and harmful than beneficial. Now, we will see something very nice in the Quran also. Every time something is haram, we will see there's a halal alternative. Allah says, "Halallahu bay'a haram riba." Allah has made business transactions permissible and has made interest forbidden. So we see that for every, and that's why it's very important. If we talk to our kids about holidays, and we say we don't celebrate this, but hey, there's halal Eids, we have halal celebrations, all right. So we should not just say what is wrong without giving alternative. A lot of times we just say things are wrong without the alternative, and certain things doesn't necessarily have to have an alternative, of course. But we see that for every one thing that's haram in Islam, there's, like, for example, alcohol is one drink we're forbidden to drink, but look how many things we're allowed to drink. All right, so many options. Pork is one meat we're not allowed to eat, but look how many different meats we're allowed to eat. All right, so for every one haram thing, there's many halal alternatives, and we see that. So that's why we see, subhanallah, that we shouldn't make the deen harder on ourselves than, you know. And that's why one of the wisdoms of Surah Al-Baqarah being called Surah Al-Baqarah, a cow, is because some people say the cow is a simple animal, and the commands of Allah in Surah Al-Baqarah are simple, but the Bani Israel complicated it upon themselves. All right, they complicated it upon, all right, themselves. And also here we also say one of the ideas of wara is that not everything is halal. Just because it's halal, you have to do it. All right, not just because it's halal, you have to do it. So there has to be a level of discipline in our actions and ideas and thoughts. Now, of course, we talked about this explicitly in one of the hadith. If anything is in the gray area, or you're doubtful about it, it's best to avoid it, unless, for example, certain things that we're told in Islam, doubt is not overcome by certainty. So, for example, if you're 100% sure you made wudu, all right, before Fajr, like you made wudu, you put your socks on, and now you're about to pray Fajr, but now you're like, did I lose my wudu or not? Now you're certain you made wudu. You're not certain you broke your wudu. Should you make wudu again, or do you have to make wudu again? No. All right. Doubt is not overcome. Certainty is not overcome by doubt. Now for salah though, you're not sure if you made 3 or 4 rak'ahs. All right. Should you do an extra rak'ah? Yes or no? Yes, you should. Why? Because you're sure you only did 3, so you do an extra one, and then you pray the sahwa after, or may make the sahwa after. But the idea is, all right, when it comes to certainty, now somebody may say, well, what's the big deal? All right, go make wudu anyways if you're doubtful. Well, the thing is, subhanAllah, we're blessed to have excess amount of water, but many parts of the world don't actually have that luxury to be able just to turn water on at any given time. All right, so alhamdulillah, we're blessed with that. But for many people around the world, access to water is not something that is feasible. But again, we should avoid doubtful matters. And most of doubtful matters, one of the top questions we get nowadays are about buying a house. All right, is there halal companies? And subhanAllah, you have many different companies. You have UIF, you have Guidance, you have La Riba, you have all these different companies. All right. So one of the biggest expenses for any individual is the house payment or rent every single month. So one of the top questions people always ask is about buying a house. So when we buy a house, one of the biggest investments anyone would make, or even paying rent, we should always, when it comes to buying, make sure that if I'm going to follow a particular thing, that this is within a scholar opinion. All right. Because you don't want to fall into a trap where you're spending all this money and investing all your life in the house itself. The way you bought it is not permissible. Same thing with buying a car. Same thing with investing in stocks and bitcoins. We should always double check, because in Islam, one of the biggest things, all right, is our transactions and how we use our money, and also the food. So we should always try to make sure our food is halal, our income is halal, and also one of the big things that separates us and Allah refuses our dua to be answered is when we have haram income. And that's why the person, as the hadith message, فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابَ لَهُ, that the person, he's making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but his income is not permissible, mashrabu haram, what he eats is not permissible, and so forth. So the idea is we should make an intent, all right, to always make sure what we consume and what we make is acceptable by our deen. Now the last thing is, or the last couple of points here is that, so we talked about sticking to what's halal and making sure, the obligatory things. We talked about avoiding what is forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked about also here, the last thing is where the hadith mentions that there's certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not said anything about certain things as an act of mercy, not forgiveness, so do not inquire about this. And there's discussion about this particular statement. But here, oh yeah, and also we talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the legislator. So here, during the time of the Sahaba, the Sahaba would not ask a lot of questions because they said the legislation was still coming. But after that, we're allowed to ask, but within the guidelines. So for example, somebody asked the Prophet ﷺ about Hajj being fard every year. The Prophet ﷺ responded that if he was to say yes, this would be tough on the Ummah. All right, imagine Hajj being an obligation every single year. We won't be able to handle it. So the thing is, we're saying don't ask things that, if we're asked at that time, will make legislation harder. The irony, if you look at Taraweeh, for example, some say that we should only pray 8 rak'ahs of Taraweeh, right? Now the hadith of Prophet ﷺ says when we do anything after Isha, it's mathna. It should be 2 rak'ahs, all right? 2 units of salah. So for example, you're praying sunnah, let's say for example, salat al-dhuhr, some say there's 6 units or 6 rak'ahs of sunnah. So you can pray 4 before, or 2 after, and 2 after, or 2 before and 4 after. All right, so 6 rak'ahs for dhuhr, 2 before Fajr, 2 after Maghrib, and 2 after Isha, a total of 12. Now, for the dhuhr, some people say, can I just pray the 4 sunnah before in one time? The answer is no. When it comes to sunnah, it should be 2 units of 2. All right. Of course, when you're talking about witr, some pray the witr all 3 in 1. All right. Generally, for the witr, you can pray 2, then 1. All right, and as long as it's an odd number, that's for witr. But generally, for all the other sunnahs, it should be mathna, as the Prophet ﷺ, 2 units of 2. So anyways, the Prophet ﷺ was not known to be praying more than 8. during the time of Umar bin Khattab, all right, he started to pray and he enforced the 20 rak'ahs of Taraweeh. Now the Prophet ﷺ informed us, follow my example and the example of the rightly guided Khalifas, right? Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum, may Allah be pleased with all of them. And one of the things he mentions is that the Prophet ﷺ, if he was to pray more, he was afraid that would have been a burden upon the Ummah and everyone would have thought they would have to pray 20 or whatever number it is. So here, the 20, that fear is gone, all right? So now you have people who pray 8, people pray 20, some people pray 36, all right? Like certain parts, they pray 36 rak'ahs. Imagine you had 36 rak'ahs at TMC, all right? Everyone will be gone like, yo, peace out. But anyways, so that being said, all right, the reason I mentioned this shows us the mercy of Islam, the mercy and the validation or the validity of different opinions that are acceptable. So that's because you are not doing, or you don't know about it, doesn't mean you can claim this is wrong. So you have to be extra careful. If the grandsons of the Prophet ﷺ saw older men making wudu, they didn't say, hey, look at him, he's 50 years old, doesn't know how to make wudu. They were very humble. They went to him and asked him, Hassan Hussein, they asked the older men, we're going to make wudu, can you correct us? That's the wisdom they used. And then he realized that they were teaching him how to make wudu without even having to say anything. All right. So again, a lot of times the way we speak to each other, the way we interact with each other, is very, very important. Because Aisha would say, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, that if Islam started with halal and haram, the Sahaba themselves would have not followed. And Allah says, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it is by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the Prophet ﷺ showed mercy. If the Prophet was harsh-hearted and mean towards the companions, they would have dispersed and left the Prophet ﷺ, not because Islam is not the truth, but because of how he treated them. And how many people do I know? All right, you probably know that they don't want to come to the masjid because of how people treated them. We're not saying we should avoid the masajid or leave Islam. And I always say, follow Islam, not the Muslims. All right, what should I always say? Follow Islam, not the Muslims. But at the same time, realize that we are ambassadors in the face of Islam. So if somebody comes to the masjid for the first time, all right, you know how somebody doesn't come from the masjid for a long time, what is the first thing people say? Are you at the right place? All right, you're usually at the bar, or what are you doing at the masjid? Don't make the person feel bad. All right, a lot of times people say, oh, did you take a wrong turn, or all these different things. So the idea is, all right, we should be means of encouragement for goodness. Another thing about questioning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the Bani Israel to slaughter a cow. That's all they had to do. But then they asked what kind of cow, and it became so tough, all right, and they made it so hard that they had to, it became very hard to find and very expensive. All right, so again we learn an excessive amount of questioning a lot of times is no good, and that's why they said half of knowledge is asking good questions, because a teacher, when he's asked a good question, can tell this person is actually a good student. This person did their research. All right, this person actually knows what they're talking about. So if somebody comes and is watching a basketball game, and he says, how many touchdowns did you score in the NBA game? Like, this guy doesn't even know what a field goal is, right? This guy's in a whole different, like, not even madhab, is like world, right? So the idea, or sport. And the idea is a lot of times people ask questions like, what is this guy asking about? All right. So the idea is that another thing, an example in Islam, I think this is very important because it's very practical. So in the Quran it says, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمْ أُفٍّ. Don't even do uff with your parents. Now, the scholar said, had there been a slighter way of expressing disagreement or disappointment to your parents, Allah would have used it. But this is the least of disrespect we do to our parents, is like, like that. All right. So then, does that mean? Now, does the Quran mention not hitting your parents? Yes or no? It doesn't mention it. All right. It doesn't need to mention it, because if this is forbidden, then this is forbidden by default. All right. So it doesn't have to tell. So also, it is forbidden to go beyond that, to yell at them, to scream at them, and so forth. All right. It's forbidden. So here we're told the slightest form is to do uff like that. All right. So here we see the Quran sets the principles for us to live by, and the life of the Prophet ﷺ gives a practical way of doing it. And I do want to mention that we all make mistakes. All right. So a lot of times we always have to remember, perfection is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the final things I want to mention about this hadith is that actually one thing I do want to mention is that although the Prophet ﷺ has passed, there's no risk of making the religion more difficult. All right. And we should not ask questions that are not of benefit to us. And I'll give an example. And this is, know what happening in people's lives. or knowing certain things. Because if you find out certain things, then you become responsible. All right. For example, when you do mental health things, and somebody says to you that they're thinking about suicide, you have to like do something about it by law, kind of, right? You have to report it. All right. So sometimes the more you know, the more responsibility there is. Those of you who have more knowledge about Islam, those of you who are coming to the masjid have more responsibility than those who have less knowledge and less come to the masjid less. We're held more responsible. All right. We have more of a responsibility. So the idea is we should always ask questions that benefit us. All right. And things that are not wasteful and that cause argument and friction. And that's one of the things about when you ask a question, ask with the idea of asking to gain, not to ask to see what answer you want, all right, or to prove a point or to make someone look bad, but rather ask out of sincerity. So that's why I always say, if you're giving da'wah and you're talking to an atheist or somebody and you're realizing this, they just want to go into the same circle, don't waste your time and their time. Say, okay, thank you. There's no need to argue. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Abasa wa tawalla an jahal amma. Prophet was trying to talk to the high officials of Quraysh, all right, like we are now. We always try to talk to the high officials in government, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that that blind person deserves your attention more. That blind person that you slightly turned away from or frowned, he deserves your attention. So we may look at that homeless person and then you see somebody and so like, we need to give da'wah to these people. But Allah is saying, no, if that person is willing to listen to you, he deserves your attention. That 10-year-old deserves your attention. All right? Because that 10-year-old that you're treating nice today, 5 years from now, he's going to remember that positive association. So when we see kids in our masjid, this is one of the beautiful things I like here, is when our kids come to the masjid, we should welcome them. All right? And subhanAllah, you see how often when they come, they're in the first couple of weeks, they're running around, but then they're eventually standing in prayer, right, with everyone else. But if we were to shut the door from the beginning, how many kids are we losing? And that's why one time we had Saturday school, and it was time for janazah prayer. So they said, one of the people said, we shouldn't have any kids at the janazah. All right? I said, no, who's going to pray on you guys when you die? If they don't pray the janazah on you today, who's going to pray when you die? Yes, you're afraid of them, but let them come pray. You never know. They're the ones who are going to make dua for you tomorrow. So let them come pray. Yes, they're going to be a little rowdy. No, but let them train them now. If you don't train them today, when are they going to learn how to make janazah? When are they going to learn how to make dua? All right? So a lot of times we think, oh, only certain people should come. Like, imagine a hospital had a sign, no sick patients allowed. All right? The hospital was shut down. All right? We're all coming to the masjid. We all have like disease in our heart. We have like, today I looked at something, you did something, you said something. We all have something to the masjid in the house of Allah. We're trying to repair our hearts. We're asking Allah for forgiveness. All right? So we'll come as sinners and seeking Allah's forgiveness. That Allah forgive us. Today I did 1, 2, 3. All right? We're making prostration. So the idea is we open that door and we welcoming to those who come. All right? To the masajid. So we should always look at it from that perspective. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the deen easy for us, as the permissible matters far exceed the forbidden matters. So we should be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. You would see some people that forbid themselves from getting married. I'm like, why are you making life hard on yourself, right? That's why somebody went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I don't want to get married. He said, Prophet ﷺ, he gets married. Somebody said, I don't want to break my fast. Prophet ﷺ breaks his fast, right? Or also Prophet ﷺ also sleeps. So we shouldn't make things harder for no reason. People like somebody one time said, I didn't go to the wedding, right? And the wedding wasn't mixed or anything. He's like, why? Because they had meat at the wedding. Like, all right, it's haram. I was like, oh man, this guy's a G, mashallah, right? Everything's haram to him, right? And then look, all these guys went to their wedding. The thing is, don't make yourself look good or somebody is better because they think everything is haram. I don't come outside the house. Why? Because if I go outside the house, I might hear music. All right? Everything just becomes haram, haram, haram. All right? And that's why, a lot of times we shouldn't judge somebody or think somebody's more higher in piety just because they say more things are wrong. Right? This is not how we look at things. All right? Because they're just making it harder. And certain things are haram, they're haram. I'm not talking about that. But things that are not haram at all. All right? They're permissible. But you're just making it harder on yourself. That's on you. But don't try to impose that upon others. All right? Don't make Islam harder on others because you're making it harder on yourself. So anyways, so we should be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making it simple for us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for us to follow. I'll stop here. Does anyone have any questions or comments they want to make? So the question about weed is good, right? You're not going to... All right. Yeah, Ahmed, do you know how to stop the live recording?